The wind screamed through Salt Creek Canyon like it had a grudge. Snow fell sideways, slicing through the gaps in Elias Redstone's long coat. His buckskin mare Dusty plowed ahead through drifts already knee-deep, snorting with every gust. Elias kept one hand on the reins, the other clutching the collar of his coat, tight around his neck, eyes scanning the gray-white dusk for any sign of movement. Something had yanked at his gut the moment he saw the smoke trail hours earlier, thin and off-pattern, rising crooked near the bluff. Now that instinct roared inside him like a fever. Rounding a bend just before the trail narrowed between two ice-slicked rock walls, he pulled Dusty up sharply. His breath caught in his throat. A small campfire, little more than glowing embers, smoldered under a rocky outcrop, its smoke barely curling in the heavy air. The figure beside it looked like a tumbleweed, at first curled tight. Then it moved. A boy. Small. 7, maybe 8. He wore no hat. His dark hair clung to his head in wet curls, and his face was pale beneath wind-burned cheeks. The boy's arms were wrapped around something in his lap, swaddled in a thin, patched blanket. "Sir," the boy's voice cracked. "Sir, my baby sister is freezing." Elias swung down from the saddle without a word. The wind ripped at his coat as he dropped to one knee. The boy didn't flinch. He just opened the blanket, showing the tiny bundle inside. A baby. Face flushed and damp mouth parted in a silent cry. Her breaths came in weak, shallow flutters. Too quiet. "How long you two been out here?" Elias asked already, yanking off his thick buffalo coat and wrapping it around them both. The boy shook his head. "Don't know. Since just after sun touched the rocks. Mama said she'd come right back." "Where is she now?" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Gone." Elias took the baby gently from the boy's arms. Her hands were stiff, eyes half-lidded, not crying. That was bad. He stood up, holding her tight to his chest. "You got a name, son, Little Hawk," the boy replied, shivering. "That's what my mama calls me. I'm Elias," he said, quick and firm. "We ain't got time to waste, Little Hawk. My cabin's about 2 miles west through this canyon. Can you ride?" The boy nodded once. Elias boosted him into the saddle and then mounted behind, cradling the baby against his chest beneath the coat. The mare snorted again, sensing the urgency. The trail was near impassable. Elias pressed his heels gently to Dusty's sides, guiding her through narrow ice paths and half-covered stones. The cold bit through his shirt, the baby's silence a louder alarm than any gunshot. The boy gripped the saddle horn, his back stiff, legs too short to reach the stirrups. Elias wrapped an arm around him to steady them both. "Her name's Morning Dove," the boy said suddenly over the wind. "She don't like the cold." "No one does, son," Elias muttered. "Hold on." It took the better part of an hour to reach the cabin, an hour that felt like 10. By the time Elias saw the sod roof and the plume of smoke from his own chimney, his arms were near numb, and the baby hadn't moved in several minutes. He didn't wait for Dusty to come to a full stop before dismounting. He lifted the boy down and cradled Morning Dove again, rushing through the front door and into a wave of warmth and wood smoke. Inside was simple, a fire crackling in the hearth, dried herbs hung from ceiling beams, old quilts folded neatly on the bench. He laid the baby on the bearskin rug in front of the fire and stripped away the frozen blanket, checking her limbs, her color, her breath. Cedar. Ginger root. Ash bark, he muttered, rummaging through the medicine chest his wife had left behind years ago. He crushed the herbs into a bowl, poured hot water from the kettle, and dipped strips of linen in the steaming brew. He wrapped them around Morning Dove's tiny feet and hands. Then he wrapped her in a thick wool blanket and tucked her against his chest, murmuring softly in Apache like Nokose had taught him, when Clara was born. Little Hawk stood by the door, arms crossed tight over his chest, eyes wide. "She gonna die?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he opened a trunk and pulled out a second blanket, wrapped it around the boy, then moved to stoke the fire. The baby stirred once, fingers twitching, a weak sound escaping her throat. Elias closed his eyes in relief. "Good," he whispered. "You fight, little one. You hold on." He looked back at Little Hawk, who hadn't moved from his spot. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Elias ladled out some rabbit stew from the pot hanging over the fire. He handed it to Little Hawk with a tin cup of water. The boy sat down on the floor near his sister, eating in silence, his eyes never leaving her face. Elias sat beside them, close enough to feel the heat on his back, the cold still clinging to his boots. He glanced down at the boy. "You did right asking for help." Little Hawk didn't answer right away. Then Mama said not to talk to strangers. "She's not wrong," Elias said. "But sometimes strangers are the only ones who show up." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled and hissed. The baby let out another faint cry, and Elias felt the grip in his chest loosen. "You got any other kin?" Elias asked. Little Hawk shook his head. "Just Mama. She ever do this before? No, sir." Elias studied the fire, jaw clenched. He'd seen what laudanum did to folks, had watched decent men rot from the inside out, watched mothers forget their babies' names. And still, some part of him hoped Wren would show her face again, even just to answer for this. Morning Dove stirred in his arms, her cry growing a little louder. "That's better," Elias murmured. He handed the baby to Little Hawk carefully. The boy took her with practiced arms, cradling her with the care of someone who'd done it far too often for his age. "She'll need warming through the night," Elias said. "You both will." The boy nodded. "Can I stay by the fire?" "You're not going anywhere," Elias said. "You're both staying right here. And come dawn, I'm sending for Doc Ellery." Then the law. Little Hawk flinched. "They gonna take us, I don't know," Elias admitted. "But I won't let you freeze. That's a promise." The boy looked up, eyes tired but searching. "You ain't my pa," "No," Elias said. "But I'm here." Outside, the storm thickened. Inside, 3 lives clung to the fragile warmth of a fire and a promise made by a man who never thought he'd hold another baby again. Elias knew what came next. Wouldn't be easy. But the moment that boy looked up at him and said, "Sir, my baby sister is freezing," something inside him had cracked open, and what poured out wasn't duty. It was something like love. "If she stops crying, that's when we worry the most." Elias said it low, half to himself, as he crouched beside the fire and checked Morning Dove's breathing again. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow flutters. Her skin, though no longer icy, was still cold to the touch beneath the layers of wool and warming poultices. The herbal wraps, soaked in cedar and ginger water, had drawn color back into her lips, but it was faint, like dawn struggling through a fog. Little Hawk didn't speak. He just sat cross-legged on the floor beside his sister, arms wrapped around his knees. Elias had given him one of Clara's old flannel shirts, years outgrown but warm. It hung off the boy like a saddle blanket, but he didn't complain. Outside, the wind hadn't let up. It clawed at the log walls, whining through the cracks like a ghost looking for entry. Snow tapped against the windows in sharp rhythms. The canyon was sealed under white and silence, but Elias had already done what he could. Earlier, he'd stepped out just long enough to toss 2 stones into the fire pit on the rise behind the cabin, an old scout's trick. The stones had been dipped in animal fat, and when the fire caught them, they'd spit up a column of dark smoke. A message. Doc Ellery would know it, if he saw it before the snow buried the signal he'd come. Elias turned back to the hearth and stirred the kettle. The scent of wild mint and sage filled the cabin. The baby whimpered a sound like a wind-tossed feather. "She's fighting," Elias muttered. "But she needs help." Little Hawk shifted beside him. Mama always said Mourning Dove was the strong one, said she didn't cry much when she was born. "How old is she now? 5 moons, maybe 6. Elias nodded. He added a pinch more ash bark to the pot. His hands were steady, but inside his thoughts ran hard and fast. This wasn't just a case of a lost mother and 2 hungry kids. The boy had kept his sister alive through a winter night in the open. That wasn't luck. That was will. "I seen her blue once," the boy said, voice tight. "Mama left her with me in the lean-to when she went to the trading post. Cold night. She cried all through the dark. Then she got quiet, and I thought maybe she died. But she didn't." The boy shook his head. "I held her close and blew warm air on her hands like the old stories say. She started crying again. Mama said if a baby stops crying, it means they're too tired to fight. That's when it's bad." Elias looked at him carefully. "You believe that?" The boy hesitated. "I don't want her to stop crying, sir." "She won't," Elias said firmly. "Not here." Mourning Dove gave a soft grunt, and Elias gently rocked her in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, just a flicker. But it was enough. "There she is," Elias whispered. Hoofbeats broke through the wind. Elias stood fast, moving to the window. Through the snow-glazed glass, he caught the dark outline of a horse and rider coming in from the pines. The figure was wrapped in oilskin and leaning hard into the storm, hunched like a man bearing burdens too old for his years. Doc Ellery. By the time Elias opened the door, the old man was already swinging down from his saddle, shaking ice from his hat. "You picked one hell of a day to light smoke," Redstone Ellery growled as he stepped in. "You bleeding out, not me." The doctor's eyes found the bundle in Elias's arms. Then the boy. Trouble found him by the fire pit down the canyon. Just the 2 of them. No mother in sight. Doc Ellery unwrapped his scarf and moved toward the fire. His breath fogged as he knelt beside Elias and peeled back the wool from the baby's cheek. "She's cold," he muttered, "but not stiff. Still pink around the lips. That's something." Little Hawk crept closer, watching the doctor's hands like a hawk. Elias motioned for him to stay close, and the boy didn't resist. Ellery worked fast. He checked the baby's pulse, her lungs, her fingers and toes. He took a long moment to press his ear against her chest, then nodded once. "She'll pull through if she keeps warm and fed. You've done half the work already." Elias exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The doctor turned to the boy. "And you, Little Hawk," straightened. "I'm fine, sir. He's tougher than most grown men I've known," Elias added. Doc Ellery grunted. "You're lucky I wasn't 5 minutes later." He stood and moved toward the small table, setting down his pack. "What about the mother gone? According to the boy, she left them just before dusk yesterday. Said she'd come back. She didn't." The doctor shook his head. "You send word, I will. Smoke only does so much. When the storm lifts, I'll ride to Silver Hollow." Doc began unpacking his bag. "Well, you'll need to tell Deputy Santiago. These kids can't be ghosts, I know." Little Hawk looked up, eyes full of questions. "You ain't in trouble," Elias said gently. "The law just needs to know you're safe. That's all." The boy nodded, but Elias saw the shadow in his gaze. Fear of being taken, of losing what little he had left. Doc set to work preparing a bottle of goat's milk thickened with pine nut powder. He handed it to Elias. "Try this. Slow." If she takes it, we're in business. Elias lifted Morning Dove, careful and steady. Her lips brushed the bottle's edge, then latched. The suckle was weak, but it was there. "Well, I'll be the doctor," muttered, almost smiling. "She's got grit." Elias didn't answer. He just watched her, holding the warmth of the moment like a fragile coal in his chest. Little Hawk crept closer and touched his sister's tiny hand. "She's gonna live," Elias nodded. "I believe she will." Doc repacked his satchel. "I'll head back before the trail freezes worse." "You'll need to speak to the law soon, Elias. Can't keep this quiet. You know that." "I ain't trying to." Ellery paused at the door. "You planning to keep them?" Elias looked down at the boy and the baby girl cradled in his arm. He didn't speak. Not yet. The door closed behind the doctor, wind and snow swallowing him back into the white. Inside, the baby sucked rhythmically, and Little Hawk leaned against Elias's side, eyes drooping. The boy had stayed awake for too long. Elias pulled him close with his free arm. "You're safe now, both of you." The fire popped. Morning Dove kept drinking. Elias looked toward the darkened window, toward Silver Hollow, miles away. If the law came, he'd face it, but he wouldn't let these children be torn apart. Not after what they'd survived. Not while he still had breath in his body. "You can shelter them, Redstone, but sooner or later, the territory will come calling." Deputy May Santiago sat tall in her saddle oilskin, slick with melting snow, dark braid damp beneath the brim of her felt hat. Her horse shifted beside the rail fence outside Elias's cabin, its breath pluming in the morning chill. The storm had broken sometime after dawn, leaving behind drifts crusted with ice and a silence so complete it rang in the ears. Elias leaned against the porch post, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with the same caution he used for rattlesnakes and land disputes. He hadn't asked for her, but Doc Ellery had sending word the moment he rode out the day before. Law always followed a trail like this: two foundlings, a missing mother, and questions waiting for answers. "I didn't ask to be their savior," Elias said. "I just couldn't leave them to die." May dismounted, hitching her reins without looking. "Ain't accusing you. You did the right thing. That don't mean you won't be tangled in knots because of it." Inside the cabin, Morning Dove slept wrapped in a quilt by the fire. Little Hawk sat nearby, carving a sliver of wood with one of Elias's old whittling knives. He worked quietly, glancing up every so often toward the door. May stepped into the cabin with Elias close behind. The heat from the fire met them instantly, melting the edge off the outside chill. She removed her gloves and crouched near the baby, eyes softening. "She's still breathing?" she asked. "Better today. Doc says she's out of danger if we keep her warm and fed." May rose and turned toward Little Hawk. "You the big brother?" The boy nodded. His fingers gripped the knife tighter, not from threat, just from nerves. "What's your name, Little Hawk?" She knelt so they were eye level. "That's a strong name. You know why I'm here?" Little Hawk hesitated. "To take us," May glanced at Elias, then back. "No. Not today. I came to find out what happened. That's all." The boy looked down. "Mama said she had to fetch something. She told me to wait by the fire. Said she'd be quick. Did she say where she was going?" He shook his head. Elias brought over a tin cup of warm milk and handed it to the boy, who took it without a word. "She'd take her gear, a satchel rifle, her medicine pouch, and her purse. That's all." May straightened. "Any idea if she's done this before?" "No," Elias answered. "But the boy mentioned laudanum. I've seen the signs, gaunt eyes sunken. She's chasing relief more than she's chasing trouble." May sighed. "Folks been turning up at the old trading camp near the wash. Some don't come back." Elias's jaw tightened. You think she headed there? It's a start. Little Hawk looked between them. You're gonna find her. That's the idea, May said. We can't leave her lost, not in this cold. I don't want her mad, he said, voice small. She gets mad when she's sick, but she always comes back. May didn't respond right away. She rested a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, then stood and pulled Elias aside near the wood stove. She could be dead, she said quietly, or gone into something worse. You planning to keep them here indefinitely? I ain't got answers yet. Well, you're gonna need them. May folded her arms. They're tribal born. Chiricahua blood, from what I can tell. That puts them under both territorial and tribal jurisdictions. If she don't show, child services will come sniffing, and they'll split them if no kin steps up. Elias's eyes darkened. They'll not separate those two. I believe you. But the law don't run on what's right. It runs on paper. Elias moved to the window and stared out at the ridgeline. The snow had crusted the pines in white, but the path to the mining trails lay clear now. It would take a day to ride it careful less if he pushed hard. I'll go look, he said. Take the trail myself. You sure? May raised a brow. I can ride out with you tomorrow. I'm sure. The boy don't want to leave her side. He won't talk much unless I'm here. But I know those hills better than anyone. If she's out there, I'll find her. You planning to leave the children alone? No. I'll send for Nkosi. May's brow lifted. The medicine woman she helped raise Clara. She'll come. May nodded slowly. All right, Redstone. You do this right, I'll keep the papers off your doorstep for a spell. But don't let it drag. The territory's patient, but not kind. As she stepped outside, Elias followed her out onto the porch. She paused at the bottom step, glancing up. You've changed, she said. Maybe, Elias replied. Maybe I just remembered something I'd forgotten. May mounted her horse and turned toward the trail, snow crunching under hooves. Elias watched until she disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the cabin. Inside, Mourning Dove stirred, and Little Hawk looked up from his carving. Who was she? He asked. Lawwoman, Elias said. But she's not here to hurt you. She gonna take us. No, Elias said firmly. Not if I can help it. The boy studied him, then returned to his carving. The shape was starting to take form, a bird with spread wings. She's getting better, the boy said. She opened her eyes when you were talking. Elias smiled faintly. Good. That's a start. He moved toward the hearth and added another log, the flames sparking higher. He'd need to ride at first light. If Wren was still breathing, she'd be heading somewhere familiar, somewhere she could disappear. And he knew just the place. The abandoned shacks near the Black Hollow mine. He'd tracked outlaws there once. He'd tracked wolves, too. Now he'd track a mother on the edge of breaking and maybe bring back something worth saving. Or maybe not. But he had to try for the boy, for the baby girl, and for whatever piece of himself he'd buried the day his own daughter left for Santa Fe. He moved to the cabinet and began packing his saddlebag with jerky flint and a coil of rope. Outside, the cold deepened. The sun slid behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the trail. Elias tightened the strap on his pack and whispered under his breath, "You'd better still be breathing, Wren, or this boy's heart will break for good." Some folk vanish to escape trouble. Others vanish because they've become it. Bo Kincaid's voice was low-riding just under the creak of his saddle as they followed the broken trail east of Salt Creek Ridge. Snow still clung to the pines, but the sun had turned it wet and slushy, and the horses' hooves sank deep into the thawing dirt. Elias Redstone didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the tracks ahead, faint indentations left by boots not more than 2 days old, weaving through brush and stones toward the scarred slope of the Black Hollow mine. He hadn't wanted company, but Bo had shown up that morning like he always did when something serious was in the wind, uninvited and too stubborn to turn away. They hadn't spoken more than 10 words in the last 2 years, not since their falling out over the land at Dry Creek. But Bo had a long memory, and apparently a short tolerance for watching children be left out in the cold. She headed straight for Black Hollow. Bo said, flicking the reins lightly. "Ain't no good up that way but whiskey and ghosts." "She's chasing something," Elias muttered. "Might be laudanum. Might be death." Bo grunted. "Same thing far as I've seen." They rode another hour in silence, winding higher into the scrub hills where the trees thinned and the wind picked up again. The mine lay ahead, carved into the side of a gray cliff, like a wound that never healed. The shacks around it were falling in weather-beaten skeletons of tin and pine that once held miners during the silver rush, now long abandoned. Elias dismounted as the wind shifted, bringing with it a scent he didn't like. Smoke. Faint but recent. He crouched near a flat rock, brushing away pine needles. Boot prints, one set, small, dragging on the left side. "She's limping," Elias said, "or too far gone to walk straight." Bo swung off his horse and pulled his rifle from the saddle holster. "I'll check the backside. You take the sheds." Elias nodded and moved toward the first shack, his Colt tucked close under his coat. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the hinges swollen with cold. Dust and darkness. Nothing. He moved to the second, no door, just a canvas flap hanging limp. Inside, a busted cot and the stink of mildew. Then he heard it. A cough. Soft. Gurgling. He turned toward the third shack, a low, slanted thing leaning against the rocks. Smoke curled from a chimney pipe, barely visible under the roofline. He stepped closer, boots crunching on old glass and snow-crusted wood. The door was cracked open. He pushed it with his boot. Wren lay curled on a pile of musty blankets, her face gaunt and waxy skin the color of ash. Her dark hair was tangled around her face and her lips were cracked. A bottle lay on its side near her hand, contents long gone. When she saw him, her eyes fluttered. Clara Elias knelt beside her. "It's Elias. You remember me?" She blinked slowly. "You came. Your children are alive," he said. "But Morning Dove was near gone when I found her. Do you remember leaving them?" Her head rolled to one side. I meant to come back. Just needed a little something to keep warm. You left them in a snowstorm." "I didn't know it would get bad," she whispered. "Didn't think it would take this long," the man promised. He said just a vial, and I'd feel strong again. Bo stepped into the doorway, lowering his rifle. "She don't look strong." Wren coughed a dry, rattling sound. Her body trembled under the thin blanket. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a flask. "Drink this." She sipped, gagged, then took another mouthful. "I need to get you out of here," Elias said. "On your feet?" "I can't," she murmured. "Leg hurts. Slipped coming in. Hit my hip." Bo stepped forward. "We can fashion a litter? Strap it to your horse?" Elias nodded. "Do it." Bo moved fast, pulling gear from the saddlebags. Elias stayed by Wren's side, propping her up. "Why'd you leave them?" he asked again. "I was tired," she whispered. "Everything hurt, every breath. They cried all night, and I thought just a little quiet. Just an hour. I'd come back. I swear it." Elias didn't respond. Her breath reeked of laudanum, sweet and rotten. Her skin was hot now, but it wasn't a good heat. Fever. By the time Bo returned with the makeshift litter, Wren had passed into a doze, her body limp. "She gonna make it?" Bo asked. I don't know. Together they lifted her carefully and strapped the litter to Elias's horse. Bo held the reins as Elias mounted his own. They started the slow descent back down the trail, the sun already leaning westward. Shadows stretched long through the trees. You still plan to keep them kids? Bo asked. They're not mine. Didn't ask if they were. Asked if you plan to keep them. Elias looked ahead at the trail. They've got no one else. And no matter what happens to her, they need someone steady. Bo snorted. Didn't peg you for the fathering type anymore. I didn't either. Silence rode with them a while. As they reached the base of the ridge, a figure stood at the bend of the trail, leaning on a staff wrapped in faded red cloth. Nkosi. Her long braids were streaked with silver, and her face was weathered but calm as river stone. She gave a slight nod. I got your message, she said. I didn't send one, Elias said. You lit a fire. It was enough. Nkosi approached the litter, looking down at Ren, then turned to Elias. The baby alive, healing, and the boy still watching, still waiting. Nkosi placed a hand on Ren's forehead, then looked back at Elias. Take her to the mission house in Silver Hollow. I'll go to the children now. Elias handed her a small pouch of dried herbs for the baby's lungs. Nkosi tucked it into her shawl. You've done well, Elias, but this is only the beginning. You don't just warm bodies, you must warm hearts. And broken hearts, they heal slow. Bo gave a low whistle. She always talked like that. Elias smiled faintly, only when she's right. They parted ways at the fork, Nkosi toward the cabin, Elias and Bo toward town, the burden of a broken mother between them. The wind picked up again, but it no longer howled. It whispered, and for the first time in many years, Elias Redstone listened. She left them, not out of hate, but because she couldn't carry her grief any further. The words came from Sister Magdalene's voice, low and steady as she folded a warm cloth over Ren's brow. The mission house in Silver Hollow was quiet that morning, hushed by snowfall and sorrow. The pine-scented air hung heavy inside the adobe walls, thick with smoke from the hearth and the scent of boiled herbs. Ren lay pale against the clean linens, her breaths shallow but steady, now her fever broken in the night. Elias stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the snow drift down like ash outside. He hadn't spoken since bringing Ren in the evening before. He hadn't needed to. His silence said everything. Sister Magdalene wrung out another cloth and replaced the one on Ren's head. The sickness of the spirit runs deeper than fever, Mr. Redstone. You know that better than most. She left 2 children in a canyon to freeze, Elias said, jaw tight. She did. And she may never be whole again. But broken doesn't mean wicked. He didn't reply. His hand dropped to the edge of the window frame, fingers curling. Sister Magdalene turned toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. She asked for them. Elias's gaze lifted slowly. What, before she slipped into sleep again, she asked if Little Hawk and Morning Dove were safe. She said your name. She said you found them. Elias let the silence stretch between them. She'll live, the sister added. Her legs badly bruised and the laudanum still in her blood, but the worst is past. It's her spirit now that needs tending. He turned from the window, his boots echoing softly across the flagstone floor. He stopped beside the bed, looking down at Ren. Her face was thinner than he remembered, her lips cracked skin worn. But under the strain, she looked young, too young to carry the weight she bore. You knew her husband, Sister Magdalene asked. Not well, Elias said. But I knew of him. Died in a river accident last spring. Left her with 2 children, no land, and a heart full of ghosts, Sister Magdalene nodded. And no tribe to fall back on. She was in between places. Not fully Apache, not fully settler. Belonged to both and to neither. She still does. The nun didn't argue. She simply pulled a wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'll want to see them. She doesn't get to make that call right now. She carried them in her body, Elias. That bond is not easily broken, and yet it broke. Sister Magdalene gave him a long, gentle look. You've lost too. I can see it in your eyes. What stopped you from falling apart the way she did? Elias didn't answer. Not at first. Then he said quietly, someone stayed. Clara's mother. Even when we split, she never left our daughter behind. He reached down and touched the edge of the blanket on Wren's cot. That's the difference. Staying. The door creaked open behind them, and Deputy May Santiago stepped in, brushing snow off her coat. Her cheeks were red from the wind, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She's alive then, May said, glancing toward the bed. Barely, Elias replied. May crossed to him. I've got some news. A rider came from Tucson this morning. Social Services is sending someone from the circuit office in 2 days. Elias stiffened. That fast, May gave a half shrug. It's a slow season. Not many distractions. They heard about your rescue and now they're sniffing around. Little Hawk doesn't know yet, I didn't tell him. I figured you'd want to. Elias exhaled slowly. He'll think they're coming to take him and his sister away. They might be. Not if I can help it. May gave him a long look. Then you'd best be ready. Papers or not, they won't care how much you've done unless you prove you're capable of more. Elias nodded once. They'll stay with me. I won't let them get split. May's voice softened. That boy clings to you like you're already his father. I'm not. But I'm what he has. He left the mission soon after riding back toward the cabin with a heavy pack slung behind his saddle Herb's food, a warm shawl Sister Magdalene insisted he take for the baby. Snow crunched under Dusty's hooves, but the sky had begun to clear. Blue stretched across the peaks, sharp and cold. The cabin came into view as the sun leaned toward the west. Thin smoke curled from the chimney. It smelled of cedar and cornbread. He dismounted and knocked snow from his boots on the porch. Inside, Nkosi sat by the hearth, stirring a pot over the fire. Morning Dove lay asleep in a nest of blankets, nearby cheeks, pink fingers curled. Little Hawk sat cross-legged beside her, carving again. He looked up as Elias stepped in. You find Mama? Elias nodded. She's alive. The boy looked down at his carving. She's mad. She's just sick. Little Hawk didn't speak. He slid the carving, a bird in flight, into his pocket and stood. She want us back. Elias crouched to his level. She asked about you. She said your names, but she can't care for you yet, Hawk. She's not ready. The boy swallowed hard. Will she ever be? I don't know. But until then, you and your sister are safe here. The boy looked him in the eye, voice steady. Even if the law says we can't stay, I'll fight it if I have to. Little Hawk nodded, then reached down and picked up Morning Dove, cradling her against his chest. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. She likes your voice, the boy said. Elias smiled faintly. Then I'll keep talking. That night after the children were asleep, Elias sat by the fire with Nkosi. She poured him tea from a chipped clay cup, the steam rising in slow coils. You know they'll come, she said softly. I know. They'll ask for documents, signatures, blood ties. I've got none of those. But you have something else, she said, touching her chest. Something rooted deeper than ink. Elias looked into the fire eyes, catching the flames. I'll give them what they need, he said, but I won't give up these children. Outside, the moon rose silver over the canyon, and inside, Elias Redstone prepared for the fight ahead. "You ain't my pa, but you're the only man who's come back for us." Elias froze when Little Hawk said it. The boy sat across from him near the fire, cradling a hickory carving in his small hands. It was nearly finished now, a hawk in flight wings stretched wide its body, rough-hewn but full of spirit. The kind of carving made by hands that understood how to hold on. Outside, dusk had turned the canyon to shadow. The wind had died down. A stillness settled over the hills, broken only by the crackle of fire and the soft coo of mourning dove who lay swaddled nearby dreaming. Elias reached for the kettle, poured 2 cups of pine needle tea, and handed one to the boy. "I didn't come back out of pity, Hawk," Elias said quietly. "I came back because you matter." The boy looked up, uncertain. "Your sister matters. You both do." Little Hawk nodded slowly, eyes unreadable. They drank in silence, the kind of silence that says more than words. Earlier that day, Elias had taken the boy out to the ridge behind the cabin. Snow still crusted the ground in the shade, but the sun had melted patches clear. It was there that he'd shown Hawk how to set a snare. "This is how you catch a rabbit without firing a shot," Elias had said, crouching beside the looped cord between 2 rocks. Silent. Clean. If you do it right, it'll feed you for days. Little Hawk had studied every movement, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn. Then he surprised Elias by mimicking the knot with precision. "My uncle showed me this once," he said. "Before he died. What happened to him? He was sent east." Hawk answered. "Said they were going to make him proper. Never came back." Elias didn't push further, but he understood. They had walked back to the cabin in the quiet, the boy glancing over his shoulder at the snare, as though it might come alive and vanish. Now by firelight, the memory of that small conversation lingered. "You remember what Deputy May said?" Elias asked. The boy nodded. "The law's coming. They'll ask questions. About me, about your mama, about whether you should stay here." Hawk stared at the carving in his lap. "They'll take us. Not if I can help it." "She's not better yet." "No," Elias admitted. "She's not." Little Hawk's fingers tightened around the carving. "They'll split us up." Elias leaned forward. "I won't let that happen. But you need to be brave like you were in that canyon. You tell them what you told me, that you want to stay, that you want your sister safe." The boy looked him square in the eyes. Will they listen to a kid? Sometimes the truth's loudest when it comes from someone small. Later, after Hawk had fallen asleep with the carving still in hand, Elias stepped outside. The moon hung low and full over the pine tops, casting the ground in pale silver. Nkosi was already there, sitting on the bench beside the woodpile, wrapped in her shawl, eyes on the stars. "You speak to the boy?" she asked. "I did. He trusts you." "I don't know that I've earned it." Nkosi tilted her head. "You came back. That's more than most." Elias sat beside her, the night air sharp against his skin. "I never thought I'd raise another child," he said. "After Clara left with her mother, I figured that part of my life was over." Nkosi gave him a look. The Creator doesn't always close doors. Sometimes he just leaves them unguarded and lets a child walk in. They sat without speaking for a long time. Coyotes howled in the distance, the sound carried on wind from the ridges. "Tomorrow," Nkosi said, "I'll walk with the children, down to the riverbank. We'll gather the herbs for the ceremony." "What ceremony?" "The one that makes the soul strong." "Not for them, for you." Elias looked at her, puzzled. "You need to believe," she said. "Not just in them, but in yourself. You can't carry children with hands too afraid to hold." "I'm not afraid," Elias muttered. "You are Nkosi," said, soft but firm. of failing them, of loving them too much. Elias's throat tightened. He said nothing. They will see that, she added. The law, the people from Tucson. They will look at you and ask if you're the kind of man who stays, and your eyes must answer louder than your words. I'll do whatever it takes. Then open your arms, Elias, not just your door. The next morning, Elias rose before the sun. He made cornbread and stew, setting out bowls before the children stirred. When Little Hawk opened his eyes, he looked confused for a moment, then smiled faintly. Morning Dove gurgled from her cradle, reaching toward the morning light that spilled through the shutters. After breakfast, Nokosi took the children down the river path. Elias watched them from the porch as they disappeared between the trees. Hawk holding his sister in a sling across his chest, Nokoze leading with her staff. He turned back to the cabin and began to clean. He scrubbed the hearth, straightened the beds, shaved, and changed into the shirt Clara had gifted him last fall. A man needed to look like he meant to stay. When the door creaked open near noon, Nokosi stepped in first, followed by Little Hawk and Morning Dove. The baby reached toward Elias the moment she saw him, little fingers outstretched. He gathered her into his arms. She remembers you now, Hawk said. She cries when you're gone. Elias smiled. That makes two of us. He glanced at Nokose, who gave a small nod. Later that evening, as the sky turned lavender with the coming twilight, Elias sat with Hawk on the porch. You ain't my pa, the boy said quietly, watching the clouds shift above the ridgeline. Elias nodded. But you're the only man who's come back for us. Elias didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight again, the kind of ache he hadn't known in years. I'll keep coming back, he said finally. The boy leaned against him without speaking, small shoulder pressing into his side. That night, Elias sat by the fire long after the children had gone to sleep, carving a bird of his own wings, wide heart steady. Because the boy was right. He wasn't their father by blood, but some ties ran deeper, made not of blood but of presence, and he meant to stay. If you call this justice, make sure it don't break more than it saves. The words hung in the air like wood smoke floating above the rough-hewn benches and straw-covered floor of the old livestock barn that now served as Silver Hollow's makeshift courthouse. A few lanterns swung from crossbeams overhead, throwing gold light across solemn faces. Snow crackled and melted outside, dripping from the eaves, but inside the barn, the air felt dry and sharp with tension. Elias stood with his back straight, arms at his sides, facing the trio at the front table: Territorial Judge Amory, Deputy May Santiago, and Mr. Thatch, a broad-shouldered agent from the Child Services Office in Tucson. His mustache was waxed, his papers spread wide. He looked at Elias like he was a man being weighed in iron scales. Behind Elias, Little Hawk sat stiffly on the edge of a hay bale, Morning Dove asleep in his lap. Nokosi rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. Bo Kincaid leaned in the shadows near the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. The town had come out in whispers, standing at the edges of the barn, or peering through the slats, pretending they weren't listening. Judge Amory cleared her throat. Mr. Redstone, it is our duty to evaluate the placement of Little Hawk and Morning Dove in accordance with territorial law and child welfare protocol. You are not a blood relative. You have no legal guardianship. Why do you believe you are fit to care for these children? Elias looked down at the worn floorboards for a moment. Then he raised his head. I didn't find them because I was looking to become a father, he said. I found them because no one else was looking at all. They were left to the cold and would have died if I hadn't stopped. I brought them in, fed them, warmed them, stayed up nights when the baby's breath turned shallow. I don't say that to be proud. I say that because sometimes doing right ain't about having permission. It's about doing it anyway. Thatch leaned forward. Have you filed any adoption petitions through the court? Not yet. Do you have prior parenting experience? I raised my daughter Clara until her mother took her to Santa Fe when she was 6. The agent scribbled something, and since then I've been alone. Judge Amory nodded slowly. Deputy Santiago, you've had eyes on this case. What's your assessment? May stood. I visited the cabin 3 times since Mr. Redstone took the children in. Both are in good health. Mourning Dove is growing stronger by the day. Little Hawk sleeps through the night now, which he didn't before. There's food, warmth, and structure. I see no harm being done. In fact, I see healing. Thatch adjusted his collar. We've had concerns raised about the mother's condition. If she recovers, she retains her parental rights. How does that factor in? Nkosi stood from the bench, her voice calm and clear. Ren is not ready. She's still walking in the fog. Her path is her own, and we pray she finds it. But until then, her children need roots, not limbo. The judge looked toward Elias again. Are you prepared to make this arrangement permanent? I am, Elias said without hesitation. You understand that if you are granted custody, even temporarily, the law will expect regular reviews, home visits, schooling, medical evaluations. I'll do it all, he said. Just don't split them. A murmur rippled through the small crowd near the doors. The judge tapped her gavel lightly on the table. Then she looked to the child. Little Hawk, she said gently, will you speak? The boy stood cradling his sister with one arm. He looked small against the backdrop of the barn, but his voice was clear. We were cold. Mama said she'd come back, but she didn't. He did. He nodded toward Elias. He stayed. He stepped forward 1 pace. Mourning Dove needs me. I need her. If you take us somewhere else, they might split us up. I heard that's what they do. He glanced at Elias, then back to the judge. He don't talk too much, but he listens. He don't run. I want to stay. The silence after his words was long. Finally, Judge Amory leaned back in her chair. We don't have a tribal representative here due to the snow delaying travel, but I believe enough has been said. Mr. Redstone, you are hereby granted temporary foster custody of both children pending further review. That includes regular check-ins and compliance with all territorial requirements. If you fail to meet those standards, the children will be removed. Do you understand? I do. She nodded. This is an unusual case. But not all families are born of blood. Some are forged in fire. She brought down her gavel. The sound echoed across the beams and rafters. The crowd began to murmur again. Bo Kincaid stepped out from the shadows and clapped Elias once on the back. Didn't think you had it in you, he said. I didn't, Elias replied, until I had to. Nkosi helped Little Hawk gather his things, Mourning Dove still sleeping in his arms. May approached Elias as the crowd thinned. This won't stop the questions, she said. The files, the deadlines, they'll still come poking. Let them. You know what comes next. Elias looked at the children, then back at her. Yeah, he said. We build something worth keeping. They left the barn under a sky split with winter light, the snow melting in rivulets along the street. Elias lifted Mourning Dove into his arms, while Little Hawk walked beside him, carving clutched in his coat pocket, the hawk's wings half finished. The wind had changed, softer now, almost kind. Elias looked over his shoulder once at the old barn. Justice had been spoken there, but what lay ahead would demand more than words, consistency, presence, love without condition. He could offer that. He had already begun. They were born of me, but they breathed because of you. Ren's voice was soft and cracked, worn like riverstone. as she stood at the edge of the redstone porch with the low afternoon sun behind her. Her figure looked thinner, fragile against the backdrop of the mountains. A shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, but it did little to hide the way she trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, a shame that clung to her bones. Elias didn't move. He stood on the other side of the threshold, arms at his sides, blocking the doorway. Inside, Morning Dove gurgled from her cradle, and Little Hawk sat by the hearth, frozen in place, his hands balled into fists. "I only came to see them," Wren continued, not daring to step any closer. "Just once. I'm not here to take them. I know I can't." Elias studied her, searching for lies in her posture, for weakness in her resolve. He didn't find either. What he saw was a woman with nothing left but honesty. "They don't need more hurt," he said. "I know." She looked past him, toward the warm flicker of firelight spilling from inside. "I heard about the hearing," she said. "The judge giving you temporary custody. You spoke for them. They couldn't speak for themselves. I could have. Should have." Her breath hitched. "But I wasn't well enough to hold their names in my mouth, let alone their bodies." Elias stepped aside just enough that the doorway no longer felt like a wall. "You can come in," he said. She hesitated only a moment before climbing the 2 porch steps and entering the cabin. The air inside hit her like an embrace, wood smoke, sage, stew, and warmth. Morning Dove stirred in her cradle and let out a soft, sleepy cry. Little Hawk stood. His face was unreadable, but his shoulders were stiff. Wren froze when she saw him. "You've gotten taller," she said, voice breaking. The boy didn't answer. "You look after her still?" she asked, nodding toward the cradle. He nodded once. Wren swallowed. "I know you don't understand, and maybe you never will. But I want you to know that I loved you. I always did, even when I wasn't strong enough to show it." "You left us," he said. His voice didn't tremble. It hit her clean sharp like flint to stone. "I did," she admitted. "And I'm sorry. Not just for that, but for making you think you had to be the one to keep her alive." "She would have died," he whispered. "I know." Her eyes filled. "And you saved her. You saved you both. You're braver than I ever was." Elias stepped forward, setting a hand on the boy's shoulder. Little Hawk didn't look away from his mother. "You were supposed to come back." "I meant to," she said. "But my mind, my body, they weren't my own. The medicine I took, it made everything seem quieter. It made the hurt feel far away. Until it wasn't. And then it was too late." He looked at her for a long moment, then turned away, walking to Morning Dove and lifting her gently from the cradle. "She doesn't know you," he said. "I wouldn't expect her to," Wren replied. The baby fussed in his arms, then settled head against his shoulder. Wren turned to Elias. "You've done more than I ever could. She's fattened up. Strong. And he doesn't flinch anymore." "He watches everything," Elias said. Quietly, like someone who's learned to expect disappointment. "He shouldn't have," Wren whispered. She took a deep breath. "I came to give you something." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle, hand-stitched cloth, tied with a leather strap. Inside were 2 items, a beaded bracelet and a folded page yellowed with wear. "This was his father's," she said, offering the bracelet to Elias. "Made by his hands before the war took him. And this letter, it names you Guardian. I wrote it last month. Made sure it was witnessed by Sister Magdalene, in case something ever happened to me." Elias took the letter, scanning the handwriting. It was shaky but clear. The words named him Protector and Guardian. It wasn't a legal document, but it was something more powerful in spirit, a mother's release, a mother's trust. I'm not asking to come back, Ren said. Not into their lives, not yet. Maybe never. But I need to know they're safe. That someone strong is holding them steady. I am, Elias said. I can see that. She looked at her children once more, then stepped toward the door. Will you tell them I loved them? She asked. When they're old enough to ask why I left, I will, Elias said, and tell them I tried, that I wasn't strong enough. But it wasn't their fault. I promise. Ren nodded. Thank you. And then she was gone. The door closed behind her without a sound. Elias turned back toward the hearth. Little Hawk stood in silence, the bracelet now cradled in his hand. He sat down slowly, Mourning Dove still in his arms, and stared into the fire. She remembered, he said. She did. The boy looked up at Elias. Is she still my mama? Elias didn't speak for a long moment. Then he knelt beside the boy and laid a hand on his shoulder. She'll always be your mama, he said. But now you have more. You have a home. A place where no one leaves you behind. The fire crackled. Mourning Dove let out a soft sigh, then fell asleep against her brother's chest. And as the wind rose outside, whistling faintly through the cracks in the shutters, Elias sat with them, his hand still resting on the boy's shoulder, anchoring them to a new truth. One forged not in blood, but in choosing to stay. You think you've saved them, but out here the cold ain't the only thing that steals children. Bo Kincaid's warning came just as Elias slammed the cabin door shut behind him, snow and silence swallowing the clearing. The midday sun struggled through thick cloud cover, laying a pale light over the forest. In Elias's arms, Mourning Dove stirred, but didn't cry. Her face was flushed, but it was the good kind, the kind from being warm and well-fed. Little Hawk stood beside the fire, stiff, alert eyes darting to the window. They were watching us, he said. From the edge of the trees. 2 of them. Elias's jaw clenched. He placed the baby in her cradle and stepped to the window, peering out. The snow was thick where the shadows ran pine boughs, heavy ground layered in white. He didn't see movement, but he'd tracked enough men to know when he was being watched. He turned back to the boy. You see their faces? No, just shapes. One had a scarf over his head. The other had something long slung over his back. Bo walked to the door and slid the bolt into place. Child-snatching gangs been moving east. Pick off the weak. Take 'em young. Sell 'em far from here. Sometimes to work, sometimes worse. Why now? Elias asked. Because word spreads, Bo said. About a man in the canyon taking in foundlings. About a baby girl and a boy left alone by the fire. Bandits ain't just wolves anymore. They're scavengers. Elias moved to the hearth, pulling his rifle down from the mount. He checked the chamber and loaded 2 extra cartridges into his coat pocket. I'm not letting them near these children. Bo nodded. Didn't figure you would. That's why I came back. Nokose arrived within the hour. She rode into the yard quiet as fog, her eyes already scanning the trees. I felt it last night, she said. A tightening, a stir in the air. You've got death brushing the edge of your fire. Not today, Elias muttered. Nokose stepped inside, removing her cloak. You need eyes in all directions. I'll stay with the children. Elias looked at Little Hawk. You still remember what I showed you? The rifle drill. The boy nodded. Good. If anything happens, you take your sister, get low, and stay behind Nokose. The boy's shoulders squared. I won't let her be taken. The wind rose later that afternoon, whistling through the pines. By then, Elias and Bo had circled the property, laying traps in the tree line, tying bells to the back shed and porch eaves. Anything that moved without permission would be heard. At sundown, a rustle in the brush behind the barn snapped the quiet. Elias crouched low near the corral, rifle ready. Bo stood off to the right, hidden behind the woodpile. A crow cawed high above, then nothing. Then movement. A figure cloaked in fur and oilskin crept through the low brush. Another shape followed, thinner, dragging what looked like a net. Bo's voice rose sharp and clear. "You step 1 inch closer and I'll drop you before your next breath." The figures froze. Elias stood, rifle raised. "Drop what's in your hands." The taller one, a wiry man with a knife strapped to his thigh, stepped forward. "No need for shooting," he said. "We were just looking for firewood." "In someone's yard?" Elias asked. "Didn't know it was claimed." "You're walking straight toward a baby's cradle." The man didn't blink. "We heard about her. Heard she was real pretty. Someone out west's been offering coin for a girl with bright eyes." Bo stepped out from the shadows. "You picked the wrong porch, friend." The second figure, a younger man with a bandana over his face, turned and bolted. Elias fired into the air, the crack of the shot ringing through the trees like thunder. The runner stumbled and fell, then scrambled to his feet and disappeared. The older one stayed put. "I ain't looking for a fight," he said. "Just business." "This ain't a market," Elias replied. "It's a home. And you're done." Bo approached and cracked him once across the jaw with the butt of his rifle. The man went down hard, groaning. "We'll tie him to the post and ride him out to May by morning," Bo said. "No sense giving him more cold than the law will." Back inside the cabin, Little Hawk stood at the window, holding Morning Dove in his arms. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but fury. "They were coming for her," he said. "They won't," Elias promised. "Not while I'm here." Nokosi moved quietly, placing another log on the fire. "You faced more than thieves today," she said. "You faced the world saying these children aren't yours. But you stood anyway." Elias sat on the bench, rubbing his temples. "Ren gave them life," he said, "but I gave them safety, gave them something to sleep sound beneath." Nokosi nodded. "The world only asks if you stay, and so far you have." Little Hawk came to him, still holding his sister. "Can I sleep next to her tonight?" "Of course." As night settled, Bo kept watch on the porch, while Nokose brewed a bitter tea to ward off bad dreams. Elias sat near the fire, his rifle across his knees, listening to the wind and the slow breathing of the 2 children he'd come to love. It was clear now that the threat wasn't just from the cold, or the courts, or the pain of the past. It was from anyone who believed these children were unclaimed, and Elias Redstone meant to show them blood or not they belonged. To him. To this land. To the fire he would keep burning no matter what darkness pressed in from the trees. "She ain't just a child in my arms, she's the reason my heart still knows how to beat." The winter sky stretched pale and cloudless as Elias Redstone stood outside the tribal council lodge, Morning Dove nestled beneath his buffalo hide coat. Her little head, peeked out cheeks, rosy lashes dusted with frost as she slept. His hand cradled her protectively, thumb gently rubbing the edge of her wool bonnet. He could hear Nokosi's voice from inside, low and steady as she spoke to the council. Bo stood beside him, leaning against the post, arms crossed tight. "You ready for this, Bo asked without looking over. "No," Elias said quietly, "but I came anyway." The door creaked open, and Nokose stepped out. Her breath rose in puffs as she nodded. "They're ready to hear from you. All of them." Elias squared his shoulders and stepped inside. The council lodge smelled of sage and cedar smoke. The elders sat in a wide semicircle wrapped in robes of woven wool and deerskin, their eyes deep with time and silence. Chief Tana, with braids, streaked silver, and skin like weathered bark, sat at the center. The moment Elias entered, Mourning Dove stirred in his arms. Her tiny fingers opened and closed in sleep. She knows this place, Nokose whispered beside him, even if she doesn't remember it. Elias bowed his head respectfully. Chief, elders, I thank you for letting me speak. Tana lifted her chin. You bring us a child of our blood and a boy of our tribe. Yet you are neither. Elias's jaw tightened. That's true. I came here broken, with coin and cattle, but not much else. I didn't come looking for children, but they found me. He paused, glancing down at the baby. Little Hawk came to me in the snow, carrying her. She's freezing, he said. Please, mister. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I couldn't walk away. One of the elders grunted. White men always say that. They ride in with charity and expect adoption in return. I'm not asking you to forget who I am, Elias said, voice low but unwavering. I'm asking you to see who they've become. He stepped forward, turning slightly so they could all see Mourning Dove's face. She ain't just a child in my arms, she's the reason my heart still knows how to beat. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. A wind rattled the outer walls, but inside the lodge nothing moved. Chief Tana finally spoke. Bloodlines are sacred, but so is sacrifice. What proof do we have you'll stay when the snows melt and the years turn bitter? Elias looked up. You don't. Except what I've already done. I built a fire for them. I faced thieves and wolves and court riders. I sat up nights with fevers and fear. I held that boy while he cried for a mother who left him, and I rocked this girl when she couldn't sleep unless she heard my heart beating. Nokose stepped forward. I've watched them. Watched him. This man didn't come to take, he came to give. And when the giving cost him dearly, he gave more. Another elder Wesa cleared her throat. Her eyes were sharp beneath her gray braids. The children, have they spoken for themselves? I'll go get Little Hawk, Nokose said softly and slipped out. Elias remained where he stood, waiting, his arms tightening slightly around Mourning Dove as she shifted in sleep. A few council members murmured quietly among themselves, but no one raised their voice. When Nokose returned, Little Hawk was beside her, clean-faced and solemn, dressed in a simple vest and wool trousers, his hand held tightly to hers. The boy walked to Elias's side and turned to the elders. This is my sister, he said, and that's my papa. You say that like you believe it, Wesa said. I do, Little Hawk answered. He made her safe. He taught me how to hold a gun and a baby. He doesn't drink or yell. He makes sure we eat. He listens. He don't call me wild even when I mess up. He tells me I belong. Tana raised an eyebrow. And where do you belong, child? Little Hawk didn't hesitate. With him. The silence afterward felt like a test in itself. Chief Tana finally nodded once. Leave us. They waited outside the cold, cutting sharper now, though the sun shone bright above the trees. Elias paced in tight circles, holding Mourning Dove close his heart, thudding harder than when he'd faced the child snatchers or Wren's bitter accusations. Bo chewed a twig between his teeth, trying not to show nerves. You've come a long way from riding alone with a sour look, he muttered. Elias didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. When the door opened again, it was Wesa who emerged first. The council has spoken, she said. We do not hand our children to strangers lightly. Elias stepped forward. But you're not a stranger anymore, she finished. You are guardian by heart and deed. Elias's breath caught. You mean? Wesa nodded. They may stay. You will raise them. But you must do so among us, not away. She is of our people, and so shall she remain. Tears stung Elias's eyes, sudden and sharp. I'll build a second cabin closer to the village, he said. I'll bring them to the dances, to the council fires. I'll learn whatever I must. Tana appeared behind Wes, a voice grave and final. Then you are family now. Not by blood, but by fire and choice. Elias dropped to one knee. Thank you. Little Hawk grinned and ran into his arms, clutching his side. Morning Dove woke and began to coo, reaching her little hand up toward the sunlit rafters. Nokose smiled. You've carved out a place in the stone of this land. And now we build from it. Elias nodded, feeling the weight on his chest, not as a burden, but as armor. There was still Ren to face, still papers to sign and a future to shape. But for the first time since the snowstorm that brought these children to his doorstep, Elias felt like he had a tribe, a name beyond his own, and a path forward he would defend with every breath. He had not just saved them, they had saved him too. You didn't lose your children, Ren, you gave them up when they needed you most. And now they've got someone who stayed. The cabin walls creaked in protest against the bitter wind howling across the Wyoming plains. Inside, the fire blazed high in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the freshly hewn beams. Morning Dove gurgled in her cradle, swaddled tight in a blanket Nokose had woven her small hands, grasping at nothing, content and full from a breakfast of goat's milk and cornbread mash. Little Hawk sat cross-legged by the window, whittling a piece of pine into the shape of a fox, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Elias stood at the stove, spoon in hand, stirring venison stew. His eyes kept shifting to the door. Something in his bones felt uneasy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Bo had gone into town early, checking on supplies and catching news, and Nokose was up at the ridge gathering herbs before the next snow rolled in. That's when the knock came. Not the hesitant kind, or the knock of a neighbor. This one was hard, sharp, like a demand rather than a request. Elias turned and met Little Hawk's eyes. "Stay with your sister," he said. He opened the door slowly. There stood Ren. Thinner than before, her once golden curls matted and tangled eyes too wide and wild. Her coat hung loose, more patches than fabric, and behind her, 2 county riders, Sheriff Elms and a young deputy Elias didn't recognize. Elias stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. "You're a hard man to track." Ren said, voice brittle with something like defiance, but also desperation. "I didn't know you were looking," Elias said calmly. "Well, I am now, and I want my kids back." Elias's jaw tightened. "You left them in the snow, Ren." She scoffed. "I was sick. I didn't know what I was doing. I came back and they were gone. They were dying." "Ren," Elias said, heat rising in his voice despite his effort to hold it steady. "Tim was starving. Morning Dove she'd have frozen if he hadn't carried her across that prairie. You don't get to call that a mistake and move on?" The sheriff shifted awkwardly. "Mr. Redstone, we've got a report filed. Says the mother's returned and wants a hearing on custody. We're obligated to escort her if she wants to see the children." Elias narrowed his eyes. "See them? Or take them?" Ren looked past him toward the door. "They're mine. I have a right." "No," Elias said firmly, voice low but unshakable. "You had a responsibility, and you abandoned it." The sheriff cleared his throat. "That may be true, but we can't stop her from requesting visitation. Papers are being drawn up." Elias took a breath, calming the storm rising in his chest. "You didn't lose your children, Ren. You gave them up when they needed you most. And now they've got someone who stayed." Her face twisted, whether in shame or fury he couldn't tell. "I want to see Tim," she said. Elias hesitated, then opened the door. Little Hawk was already standing just inside, watching through the window. His hand was clenched around the wooden fox. When he saw his mother, he didn't move. "Tim," she said, stepping forward. "Baby, it's me. Mama's here now. I came back for you." His expression didn't change. She knelt, arms outstretched. "Don't you remember I used to sing to you? Remember you loved that?" He looked at Elias, then at Mourning Dove's cradle, then back at his mother. "I remember carrying Sarah through the snow, 'cause you didn't wake up," he said quietly. "I remember waiting by the tree with her turning blue in my arms." Wren's face went pale. "I was sick, you were gone." The words cut deeper than anything Elias could have said. Little Hawk walked forward and stopped between them. "I don't hate you," he said, "but I don't want to go with you." Sheriff Elms took off his hat and sighed. "This ain't a scene for children. We'll need to sort this through the court." Wren's shoulders dropped. "So that's it. You've turned him against me." "No," Elias said gently. "You did that all by yourself." She turned, shaking, and for a moment Elias thought she might lunge or scream. But then she stepped back, stumbling slightly, as if her legs barely held her. The sheriff guided her away, saying something soft neither Elias nor the boy could hear. Elias waited until they were out of sight, before closing the door and turning back to Little Hawk. The boy looked up. "She didn't look like I remembered." Elias crouched beside him. "Sometimes when folks are hurting, they look like someone else. Doesn't mean they can't change. Just means we can't let them hurt others in the meantime." Little Hawk nodded slowly. "Is she going to take us away?" "No," Elias said, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Not if I have anything to do with it." That night, Bo returned with news confirming the legal papers had been filed. There would be a hearing in town in 2 days' time. Elias would need to testify, and the children's placement would be reviewed. It wasn't over, not yet. Nkosi came down from the ridge with bundles of wintergreen and pine bark. When Elias told her, her face didn't change much, but her eyes flashed with that same fire he'd seen when she'd defended them before the tribal council. "We'll stand with you," she said. "This time the whole village will." Elias held her gaze. "You sure they'll come?" Some things she said are too sacred to let the law get wrong. The fire crackled behind them. Mourning Dove let out a soft sigh in her sleep, while Little Hawk curled under a quilt with the wooden fox tucked in his hand. Elias leaned against the doorframe, watching the prairie. Snow had begun to fall again, light and whispering. Another storm coming, but this time he would not face it alone. The courtroom in Laramie was nothing like the wide, honest skies of the prairie. It felt tighter, like the walls were closing in, trying to trap something wild that refused to be tamed. Elias sat stiffly in the wooden witness chair, hands calloused and still. Nkosi sat in the front row behind him, her long black braid dusted with snow from the ride in. Bo stood at the rear wall like a sentinel, arms folded, hat in hand. Little Hawk clutched Nkosi's fingers, his face solemn. Mourning Dove slept in her shawl, sling across her chest, unaware of the weight pressing down on the room. Across from Elias sat Wren, her lawyer, whispering something in her ear. She looked cleaner than she had when she'd shown up at the cabin. New dress, hair combed. But nothing about her looked rooted. She kept shifting in her seat like a tumbleweed caught in a fence. The judge, a middle-aged woman with hawk-like eyes and a voice as level as the horizon, turned toward Elias. "Mr. Redstone," she said, "you've cared for these children for over a year. But their birth mother has now filed a petition to reclaim custody. The law acknowledges parental rights, but we must also weigh the welfare and preference of the children. Tell me plainly, why should this court consider placing them with you instead?" Elias stood. He didn't clear his throat or shuffle his boots. He just looked straight into the judge's eyes and spoke. "They're not blood of mine," he began. "But the first time I saw them, the boy was holding his baby sister in the middle of a snowstorm, trying to shield her from death with his own tiny arms. No mother, no food, no shelter, just his will." He paused. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional crackle from the wood stove. "I brought them into my home, not knowing what that would mean. But I came to know them, not just their needs, but their fears, their habits, their strengths. I taught the boy to ride. He taught me how to laugh again. The girl calls me Da now, not because I told her to, because I stayed." He turned slightly, his voice lower but firmer. "You can call it foster or charity or obligation if you want. But for me, it's family. And you don't walk away from family, not when they're scared, not when it's hard, and not when someone comes back too late to fix what they broke." Wren flinched. Judge Carter nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Redstone." She turned toward Wren. "Miss Wren, you may speak." Wren stood. Her eyes scanned the room and landed briefly on Little Hawk, who looked away. "I made mistakes," she said. "Bad ones. I got sick. I left them behind because I didn't know how to stay. But I'm better now, and I want to try. I don't know if I deserve them, but I want the chance to prove I can be their mother again." There was a long pause. The judge folded her hands, then turned to the clerk. "Bring in the guardian ad litem." A woman stepped forward, Ms. Priestley, the children's appointed advocate. She wore no badge and held no papers, just a calm gaze that studied everyone in turn. "I've spoken at length with both children," she began. "Little Hawk, in particular, has expressed his feelings clearly. He remembers what happened. He understands what safety means now. And while he doesn't hate his mother, he has said without pressure that he feels his home is with Mr. Redstone. He fears being taken away would harm his sister more than him." The courtroom remained still. "In my professional opinion, removing the children from their current home would not be in their best interest." Wren closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging. Judge Carter leaned back, eyes focused on a spot just above Elias's head. Then she nodded once, decisively. "This court recognizes the birth mother's rights and the efforts she's made since the incident. However, it also prioritizes the consistent well-being and expressed wishes of the children." She looked to Elias. "Mr. Redstone, you are hereby granted full legal guardianship of Little Hawk and Mourning Dove. Miss Wren may, under supervision, pursue future visitation, but only if and when it is deemed safe and appropriate." The gavel came down. It was done. Nokosi's arms went around Little Hawk as he stared wide-eyed, processing the weight of what had just been said. Bo let out a breath and tipped his hat low over his brow. Wren didn't protest. She stood, slowly nodded at the judge, and turned to Elias. "I thought I came back to reclaim what I lost," she said softly. "But maybe they weren't mine anymore." Elias didn't reply. He simply nodded once. A quiet respect for the truth. She looked at her children one last time. Then she left. That evening, back at the cabin, the fire glowed low. Little Hawk placed the carved fox on the mantel beside the feather Nokosi had gifted him. Elias sat beside the hearth, Mourning Dove curled on his lap, gurgling at the flicker of flames. Bo sipped cider from a tin cup and grinned. "Didn't think you had a lawyer's tongue in you, Elias." "Didn't either," Elias muttered. Nokosi knelt beside him and touched Mourning Dove's cheek. "You stayed," she said simply. He looked at her. Wasn't going to do anything else. Little Hawk wandered over and leaned into Elias's side. "Can I still call you Da?" Elias looked down, eyes full. "Don't ever stop." Outside, the wind had settled. The prairie breathed in peace again. Snow fell soft and slow, not in warning this time, but like a blessing whispered from the sky. And for the first time in a long time, the cabin didn't feel like a place of waiting. It felt like home. The educational lesson learned from this story is that family is not only something we are born into, but something we build through presence, responsibility, and quiet perseverance. Life may place us in moments where doing the right thing feels heavy or inconvenient. Yet those are often the moments that give our later years the deepest meaning. Staying when others leave can become a powerful act of love that changes more than one life. Even in older age, there is lasting value in offering steadiness, protection, and compassion to those who need it most.